Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of the Red, White, and You Show with yours truly, the military medium. Today, friends, I have with me Ken Falke, who is a 21-year Navy veteran and worked in all things EOD and other areas in the Navy. Ken, welcome to the Red, White, and You Show.
Hey, good morning. How are you? Thank you for having me.
Hey, absolutely, Ken. So if you could, for the viewers, share a little bit who Ken Falke is.
Yep, happy to do that. I am a guy who lives in Bluemont, Virginia, about an hour west of Washington, D.C. I was born in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, to a father who had just got out of the Army and was on his way to Washington, D.C. to be a cop and was from Chicago, and my mom was from Pittsburgh. So after my dad graduated the police academy in Washington, we moved down from Pittsburgh to Virginia, just outside of D.C., where I grew up in Mount Vernon, Virginia, just about a mile away from George Washington's estate. Spent 18 years there. I played just about every sport, but I excelled in hockey. Left home at the ripe age of 18 to try to play semi-pro farm league hockey. Went to Texas for a year with a team called the Fort Worth Texans, who were the farm team for the Colorado Rockies, and didn't make the team, but I stayed with them, for a year, working in the ice rink and running youth and adult hockey leagues and those types of things. But my life wasn't going anywhere. I was making $800 a month, so I enlisted in the Navy as an E1 and started making $531 a month, and had a great Navy career. As you mentioned, I was a bomb disposal guy. I spent the first half of my EOD career doing traditional underwater work, mine countermeasures and the things that were, really a force of nature to do. And then the last half of my career, I spent much more of it on land and in airplanes, supporting SEAL teams and Army Special Forces units. I retired in 2002 after the first wave of deployed troops in Afghanistan, and started a consulting company called AT Solutions, which ended up growing and doing very well. Sold it for a lot of money, and 10 years into the venture, and I left and really have dedicated the rest of my life to the philanthropic work that I do now. Been married to the same woman for 38 years, Julia, this year. We've got 2 beautiful daughters and 4 amazing grandkids.
Wow, beautiful. And congratulations, by the way, for your marriage and your, just the success that you've had so far. And thank you for your service. I would ask though, Ken, is like going back to your Navy time in the Navy, did you start off right as a diver? I thought I read somewhere where at first you didn't start off as a diver, correct?
Yeah, well, it's a funny story. I joined the Navy to be a SEAL. And that's a long story in itself, but I joined the Navy to be a SEAL. I got to boot camp. They give you the physical and everything. Got in to take my eye exam, and they said I needed glasses. Now, I never wore glasses in my life, nor did I ever think I needed them until I got them. And I got glasses, and I was 10 feet off. I think to go to budge, you had to have 20/40 vision or 20/50 vision or better, and I was like 20/60. And I was working for this SEAL chief. I'll never forget him. And he said, "Oh, we're going to put in a waiver. It's only 10 feet. They're going to waive it." But they didn't. It came back disapproved. So I was kind of bummed out. I didn't know what I was going to do. He actually suggested me going EOD. EOD didn't have the same eyesight requirements as SEALs at the time. They do now. And I thought, well, I'll go, do EOD. And as I started talking to him about it and understanding what it was about, I'll never forget, I said to him, "What is EOD?" And he said, "Well, it's bomb disposal." And I said, "Chief, that sounds pretty dangerous." And he goes, "Yeah, I wouldn't do it either." So now I'm like confused, because in one breath he's telling me to do it, and the other breath he's saying I wouldn't do it. So I went to the men's room. I was kind of sick to my stomach, truthfully. And I went to the men's room just to go to the bathroom. And I'm standing at the urinal, and on this wall in front of me is this poster, and it was a recruitment poster for the Ceremonial Guard, which is the Navy's honor guard, and here in Washington, D.C. And I had joined the Navy for what was called a 3x3, which was 3 years active, 3 years reserve, because I wasn't sure. I just wanted to get my life in order and kind of maybe grow up a little bit so I could figure out what I wanted to do. So I thought, well, 3 years, I might as well go back to DC. At least I know some people there. Maybe I can, be in the Navy for 3 years and get a job. Well, I walk into the recruiting office. They're having this recruiting seminar in the gymnasium in boot camp. I went to boot camp in the Navy in Orlando, Florida, which doesn't exist anymore. But anyway, walked in to get to see these recruiters. And when I walked in, there was a lieutenant commander, a naval officer, an '04, sitting there in his dress white uniform, and I saluted him and did all the things you do when you're in boot camp. Uh, and my nickname in school was Kenny, and he said, Kenny? And I looked up and I remembered his face, but I couldn't remember his name. Well, it turned out this officer was my best friend's wife's best friend in high school, his girlfriend at the time. They were married when I met this guy, her father, who I had spent many a days at their house and in their swimming pool and all this kind of stuff. And I told him what had happened about SEAL training, and he said, "Well, if you want to come back to DC, I'd love to have you." You had to be 6 foot to get into the ceremonial guard, 6 foot, 6'2" with your shoes on. So I raised my hand and I went to DC and was in the ceremonial guard. And I only did that for 18 months. I was on duty the night that the Air Florida Flight 90 plane crashed into the 14th Street Bridge,
Oh, wow.
Washington, D.C. And late that night, I ended up working on a dive boat, which was all EOD students and instructors who had come up to do the initial salvage diving on the wreckage. And I was only making coffee for these guys and helping them do whatever they needed in the boat. But one of the chiefs in the boat told me what they did, and I told him about my story, and he said, well, "Why don't you come down next week and come into EOD?" So I did. I went down to Indian Head, Maryland, about 30 miles south of DC, took the test. I was still in great shape and passed the PT test, and the rest was history. I spent the rest of my career as a bomb disposal guy.
Wow. Wow. As you talk about that, like, hey, why don't you just come on down and do the test? I think about years past, right? And just about the ease of switching either, jobs or different things. And now it's like, well, we got to go through all these processes. And I just think about the ease of years gone by about, switching, if the circumstances align themselves correctly. And that's just so interesting. I can't even fathom, though, just the I guess the experience, and I really kind of lost for words as far as how to word it, but working on that boat that night that you had, I'm sure, as far as having a firsthand account of just being present of them recovering all that wreckage and everything else.
Yeah, the bodies. It was amazing. I don't have much, if any,
Sure.
of my Navy gear anymore. But the one thing I still have, and I've kept, and I truthfully, I'm not sure why I've kept them, but I have the black leather gloves that I was issued in boot camp, which I had on that night. That still every now and then I can smell the jet fuel on them,
Mm,
and never washed them. I've saved them, and it's just something that kind of brought me back to that time. And when I see them, I'll pick them up and smell them, and it does bring back both horrible memories, but also good memories. I felt like I
sure.
was doing something
Sure.
that was really needed that night. It was the coldest night, I think, maybe on the record books in Washington D.C., and I never felt cold. I just felt like I was there for a reason and to help people and do that. So, but yeah, it was terrible. Lots of
Mm,
dead bodies, lots of terrible wreckage, and the divers were trying to just confirm. Those initial divers that I was working on the boat, was their main job was to see if there was any survivors in the water, which
sure.
obviously there weren't.
Right. Um, Certainly a challenging time for sure. I I wanted to switch gears if we could a little bit. Well, and before we do that, I just want to point out that you ended up retiring. Correct? Is it a chief master or is it a master chief petty officer? Is that how it's
Master Chief
pronounced?
Petty Officer, yeah,
Oh, there
which
you
is
go.
Sergeant Major,
Sure.
equivalent, or Chief Master Sergeant in the Air Force. But yeah, an E9.
Okay, very cool. So, an illustrious career to say the least. Switching over, before we get into your co-authored books, and I want to talk about them, but what made you even kind of saying, "Hey, I need to start writing. I need to start, putting some of this information, or the knowledge that I've gleaned over the years into writing."
Yeah. It's interesting. I barely graduated high school. I mean, it's the my as I wasn't a great child. My mom died when I was 7 years old. I became a little bit rebellious. I don't think I was a bad kid. I mean, I never ended up in jail or any of those things. But I wasn't a great kid, and I definitely wasn't a good student. And I think as my life started going on, I guess somewhere in my career, I decided to take some college classes, and I really got to this point where I felt, that life's journey is really about wisdom, and how do we get smarter, and how do we create these philosophies in life that allow us to live positively, and be of value to the nation and to the world. And I started doing education, and as I started writing, I sold my company. I took a year off, and although I finished a bachelor's degree and on active duty, it was primarily through night school, and never really had a college experience. So I took a year off, and I did a master's degree at Georgetown University in 2010 and 11. And I just, I was writing a lot at the time, and I just felt good. And I just started, journaling a little bit more, and kind of creativity was coming from places I just didn't know where from. And, I wrote a couple songs with a friend. I wrote a couple poems. And then we started doing this work at Boulder Crest. Our program's called Warrior Path, which is a PTSD program for combat veterans. And somebody came up to me one day and said, we keep hearing all these great things about Warrior Path. Do you think what you're doing for the military would work for civilians? And we do believe strongly that it would and will. And as I started thinking about it, I thought, well, we're not a huge organization. We're a fairly small nonprofit. How are we going to help civilians? And bingo, the light comes on. It says, why don't we write a book? And my co-author, Josh Goldberg, who's a much smarter guy than I am, him and I sat down, and we just kind of started brainstorming. And we said, why don't we put our Warrior Path program, the philosophy of our Warrior Path program, into a book? But instead of telling other people's stories, why don't we just tell our own? And then at least people can start to, understand a little bit better who we are. And that's really what we did. And the book's done very well, and we're excited. I mean, I'd love to see it be a 1,000,000 copy seller. I think it's a book that, when you think of the amount of trauma going on in our nation, it's a book that could help everybody. But we're doing, in regards to a self-published book, we're doing pretty darn good on sales. And it's so warming to get these Amazon ratings and reviews and emails from people, and LinkedIn messages saying, your book saved my life. It saved my son's life. It's like just very, very heartwarming. And we're very happy that we did it.
Very cool. Let's talk a little bit about Struggle Well. Can you take us into that
Yeah.
publication?
So Struggle Well is the book that I was kind of just referring to. It was
Right.
the first book that Josh Goldberg and I co-authored. And like I said, it's really a book on the philosophy of how to live a good life, knowing that no matter who we are in life, you're going to have a life of ups and downs, and how you respond to these ups and downs is what gets you through a good life, and struggling well, and trying to normalize the fact that struggle is struggle. The mental health care system in our country is broken, and and there's a huge stigma, especially with men, as far as going and seeking out mental health care when you need help. And what we tried to do was just kind of normalize that, and just say, hey, listen, there's nothing wrong with you. Yes, things happen to us in life, but that doesn't mean something's wrong with you. And although there are some people that have severe mental disorders and
Sure.
neurological disorders, the average person who has depression and anxiety, there is nothing wrong with them. Just the fact that something happened. But what's happened in mental health care is that we've pathologized, created a medical approach to people who are suffering with what I call life. And their mental health approach is, normally medication and talk therapy, neither of which work well. And what we wanted to do was tell people, listen, nothing's wrong with you. Here's a pretty simple way of living a great life, knowing that struggle is going to happen to us in some form or fashion, every day. And we can get through it. We don't have to be depressed, and we don't have to suffer with anxiety. And that's really what we did with the book. And in the book, we wove in Josh's and my stories, our personal stories of struggle and our lifetimes, and how we've overcome those, and how we feel other people can as well.
Nice, nice. Um, Moving on to the next one that I have on the list is transformed by trauma.
Yeah. So the philosophy of struggle well, and the philosophy of the work we do in Warrior Path, is based on the science of something called post-traumatic growth. This concept of what doesn't kill us makes us stronger. That
Sure.
that if we can grow from our trauma, that struggles. I've never talked. I've interviewed a lot of very successful people. I've watched lots of interviews, like many of us had. Most recently, I watched that series on Michael Jordan. I have never in my life heard from somebody who what I would call had a successful career, who doesn't acknowledge their failures and their struggles and their stumbles.
Sure.
And that's what post traumatic growth is that if we take these struggles and failures and we learn from them, we can become a better version of ourselves. Well, the guy who coined the term post traumatic growth, Dr. Richard Tedeschi, and another doctor who we work with, Dr. Brett Moore, they have been instrumental in the work we do at Boulder Crest. And the four of us talked after Struggle Well about, again, explaining this concept of post-traumatic growth, and then highlighting stories of primarily military-related personnel. There's a mom in there whose son took her own life. There's another mom in there whose son was killed on the battlefield. And then there's other warriors in there who have suffered their own trauma, and tell their stories rather than ours. And that was the concept of transformed by trauma. But just amazing stories of people who have, arguably in many cases witnessed some of the most severe types of trauma that you can witness, and experience themselves, who have gone on to do these remarkable things in life, and followed that progression of post-traumatic growth.
Hmm. What about family path?
Yeah, so at Boulder Crest, one of the things that I learned in my early work with PTSD, people suffering with PTSD, was that it's not just about the warrior, right?
Hmm.
Post-traumatic stress affects people in many different ways. One of the ways that affects people um, is manifested in things like anger and violence, and we were seeing some domestic abuse and domestic violence cases on the rise in some of the military people we were serving. And I just said to somebody one day, I said, the problem with PTSD is it's contagious, and and unless we treat the family, it's not gonna it's sending these guys home, no matter how healthy they are, if the kids and the wife are suffering as well, or the kids and the husband are suffering, um, then it's just not going to be a great program. So we created this family path program where people who have transferred that trauma over to their family members come back and run. We run these programs primarily in the summer at our two retreat centers, and help their family members as well. It's really been very positive. We've had some great feedback from that program.
Nice, nice. Well, and it's unfortunately, sometimes it's all too true that it's the military member, the service member that gets all the focus, right? Sometimes the family members get left out of the picture, and so that's very encouraging to see that that you guys have addressed that, and saw that need. If you could, now I know you serve as a chairman of Boulder Crest. For those that are not familiar, what Boulder Crest is, and what they do, could you walk us through that a little bit?
Yeah. So I'll start at the beginning, which hopefully won't take me too long to tell you. But early in the war, my wife and I started a foundation called the Wounded EOD Warrior Foundation, and we primarily were helping the men and women who were severely injured, physically injured severely, who were medevaced back to the Washington, D.C. hospitals, because that's where we were at. We're here in D.C. And we merged the Wounded EOD Warrior Foundation in 2013 with a legacy EOD foundation that provided scholarships to children of EOD personnel. And today that foundation is known as the EOD Warrior Foundation. Well, from about 2010 to 12, we had the most severely injured EOD troops on the battlefield, and primarily in Afghanistan at the time. And my wife and I were meeting these new families here in the hospitals, Walter Reed and Bethesda Naval Hospital at the time. And we were bringing their families out to our house. We're an hour west of Washington in the beautiful Blue Ridge Mountains of Virginia. And started bringing these families out to our house. Started off as like barbecue days and hike on the Appalachian Trail, kayaking trip down the Shenandoah River. Had a couple families stay over weekends with us just to stay away from the hospital. I had a dad come out and spend a week with me deer hunting once. But what we realized was we had a big property. We had 200 acres of land. And what we realized was that, even when people are in your house, they still feel like they're guests. So my wife and a couple of her friends came up with this idea that why don't we take a portion of our land and build some cabins so these families can have kind of a home away from home. And that's really how it all started, Boulder Crest. The house that we lived in, although we didn't name it, it was named Boulder Crest. It was a 100-year-old stone farmhouse built out of boulders and set at the top of the mountain, the crest of the mountain. And at the bottom of our property, the furthest property away from our house was 37 acres of open land, meadows and fields. And we donated that 37 acres of land, put up the first $1 million, and went out and raised another $9 million to build the nation's first privately funded retreat center for combat veterans and their families. And that's Boulder Crest. About 3 years into the project, our biggest donor provided us a $10 million grant, and we went out and bought a second facility in southern Arizona, just south of Tucson. So today, what Boulder Crest Foundation is two retreat centers. We call them post-traumatic growth academies, where we run programs, Warrior Path, Family Path. We run a couples program. We run a caregivers program. We run some programs for Gold Star family members. And then when we're not running our programs, you can still come. If you're a combat veteran, honorably discharged combat veteran, you can still come with your family and stay as a guest in another program that we call Family R&R, Rest and Reconnection Time. And that's what Boulder Crest is. We also have something we launched a couple years ago called the Boulder Crest Institute for Post-Traumatic Growth, because we believe from a pure mental health, getting people better, getting people well, teaching people how to live and struggle well, we believe we're onto something. And what we're trying to do now is scale the work nationwide, which we've already partnered with 8 other nonprofits around the nation, and they're delivering our Warrior Path program. And then also really excited, about some of the legislation and working with the VA to try to make some of the care that's done at the VA better. And we've got an agreement with the VA. We've got some legislation now at the VA where we're hoping that the VA will look at our work much more seriously and see that there's a better way of doing things.
Wow. Certainly a lot of legwork on you guys' part, right? It's certainly come a long way since you guys began. I wanted to, one of the things that you guys do is you guys also work with young people, right? And, kind of advising young people entering not only the working world, but, just everyday focus. And One of the things I saw posted was kind of your 10 keys to success. Um, do you remember those off the top of your head? And could you?
Um, so that's interesting that you would have that. So I'm in the process of um, writing another book. Actually, we're kicking it off this month.
Oh,
I want to make sure that I are you talking about my Ken's 10? I call them the Ken's 10, the
yep.
secrets.
Ken's
How do you
10,
find those? That's the
yeah, set of vision
yeah,
and
yeah, yeah, yeah. So
yeah, roadmap, all
sure.
that great stuff.
Yeah, so what I've done over the years is I've read a lot on leadership. Obviously, I rose to the highest enlisted ranks in the Navy. I've led men and women on some of the most challenging and risky missions in the world. Jumped out of airplanes, dive, all the kind of things, explosive operations, all the things that you do. Um, I'm not going to say I'm a great leader, but I have found some secrets to being a good leader, and one of the things good leaders do is get people that follow them, and my definition of leadership is helping people get to a place that they can't get to on their own,
Mm.
and I believe strongly that leadership is a verb, and it's a contact sport, and I love it. But not only have I had practical application in the Navy and running a company as two companies as a CEO and two nonprofits as the chairman of the board, but I also study leadership academically and read a lot. And I think over the years, my philosophy has come down to 10 things, and those 10 things are what I call Ken's 10. The first one, as you mentioned, is simply to make sure that if you're going to lead an organization, that you have a vision, and that vision is clearly communicated and understood. And once people know, it's kind of like a map and compass course, if you will. Once people know where they're going, then they'll go there. Occasionally people get outside the lines, and as leaders, we bring them in, or if they're outside the line and it's going to benefit what's inside the lines, and we try to bring that into. But really, to create this vision that is so clear and understood that it just rolls off of the tongues of employees. And I can't tell you, in the consulting work I do, I can't tell you how many businesses I've been into that have these beautiful mission and vision and core value statements. But when you talk to the employees, it's like they don't know them, they don't live them. They bitch about the
Right.
leadership not living them, and that's really what this is all about.
Well, and that's why the military, when it comes down to the 5 paragraphs of an operation order, right? The op org, that's why the first one is mission, right? Is as
Right.
far as, what the vision is.
Yep.
What's the mission, you know?
How are we gonna do it? What is it?
Yeah.
Are we all get on the same sheet of music? And it's really interesting that you brought that up, because I always tell people, from a visionary perspective, it's much easier in small groups than it is large groups.
Yeah.
And I think that's what separates good leaders from great leaders. One of the things that separates good leaders from great leaders is great leaders. The size of the group doesn't matter, and that's one of the things that I noticed, at least in the Navy. Although I did work for the Army for a little while, one of the things that I noticed in the Navy was, that a lot of our leaders, the vision only extends to the end of their tour, which in many cases is 2 years. Officers' tours in the Navy are normally 2 years. So you get this new leader in, and for the first 6 months, they're kind of learning what's going on in the unit, and then they get about a year of, arguably leading the unit, and then they get 6 months where their biggest worry is what's coming next for them, and that you don't get long-term vision, and that's why I've actually enjoyed, as much as I love the Navy, and I tell everybody the Navy made me the man I am today. I love the civilian world better, because I feel like you can have these visions that extend longer, and really have more meaning to them. So because most soldiers, again, tactically understand that small vision, but strategically don't have any clue about what's going on in the bigger picture.
Right. Right.
Um, my second thing in my Ken's 10 is basically setting goals, and I've been my first chief in the Navy was a big time goal setter and focus on this, lots and lots of short term goals. Don't look too far into the future, focus on where you can be next week, the week after. And one of the things in academic research that we found is that the most successful people live this lifestyle. Lots of short term goals, a vision for the future, but lots of short term goals on how to get there. And work hard every morning. You work hard to get up and achieve these goals. And then you don't live this proverbial life of the tail wagging the dog, and quite frankly, a life that really causes a lot of anxiety. If I don't know what I'm going to do today when I wake up, then I become very anxious and trying to figure that out, and that's a big problem. My third thing is to be kind. I one thing I never appreciated or ever loved in the military was the screamers. and, um, I never found anybody that liked them. Even the people that did the screaming, when they got screamed at, they never liked it. So I think there's a big thing about kindness, and I believe seriously that kindness is contagious. And when the contagion doesn't occur, you just got to get those people off the team, because it just doesn't work. And that's my fourth element. The fifth one is hard work, and I measure hard work and output, not time worked. Um, I know a lot of people get into these jobs and they see the lights on in their boss's office, and they don't want the boss to be the last one out. So they think if they're there, they're going to get some, quote unquote brownie points. I don't believe in that at all. I think, I always tell my people, if you don't have anything to do here, go do it somewhere else. And if you finish your job at 2 o'clock, take off, and that's kind of the way I do it. So hard work measured in output, but not the time you work. The sixth thing is, from a leadership perspective, is to make sure, the Good to Great book is the one that a lot of people reference, but really to make sure that you get quality people on your team, and that you're not afraid to hold them accountable, that you can build them as a team, and when they're not team players, that you get them off, and that's really really important. So getting the quality people on your team is a big focus in leadership, and building that team is important. And not only the team, but your customers, depending on what industry you're in or how you identify your customers. Even in military language, we could talk about our customers being our soldiers. But to really have an understanding of what is it that customer needs from us, and are they a customer that's creating co-equal value, that what they're doing for us and what we're doing for them is a great partnership, because nothing's worse than a customer who's a pain in the ass, because if you have those customers, you just get rid of them, and just like you do the bad employees. My seventh thing is really creating a culture in your business, and that culture is a culture of what we call loyalty and satisfaction. And there's a major difference. If you think about loyalty, you can get a lot of a loyalty by having people who like you, but maybe they're not satisfied with what they're doing. So our goal in life as a leader should really be to make sure that not only do we create this amount of loyalty between us and the people who are working with us, but also that their satisfaction in their job and their outputs and their performance is in fact high. Because that there's this old saying that happiness is a manifestation of satisfaction. I can't make you happy, but I can get you into a situation where that you're satisfied with what you're doing, and then happiness becomes this manifestation that you're responsible for, not me. And one big mistake that a lot of leaders make is trying to make people on their teams happy, and it's an impossible feat to accomplish. The eighth thing is really accountability. And I start with the simple two questions I tell everybody, is that when you ask why things are going wrong, or why, the question has to be focused on why and not why me. I don't believe in this black cloud over my head syndrome. I believe that people have to be accountable, have to be responsible for their actions. And when they play the victim role, the difference between a victim and a warrior, I always tell people, is warriors will ask why, they'll fix the problem and move on. Victims will say, why me? and then they'll sit around telling everybody and complaining to everybody why this stuff's happening to them. The ninth thing in my list of Ken's 10 is to take calculated risks. I think it's important to be fearless, and especially if you're in an industry, to understand what the risks are and then to jump. And one of the things, I do a lot of mentoring to entrepreneurs, and a lot of guys, they're working a full-time job for a company or the government, but on the side they've got this business, and their real goal is to have this business done, but they're afraid to take the leap and just jump into it with both feet. And I always tell them, I said, I understand it. We all need money to survive, and I understand that you need that cash coming from your full-time job, but if your entrepreneurial venture is going to be successful, you got to jump into it with both feet. And those calculated risks and that courage is so important to success. And then lastly, I talk about character, and these aren't in order, any kind of order by any means, but what is your character? Are you really the man that you're looking in the mirror at, or are you living two different lives? But character to me is this whole concept that our thoughts and our feelings and our actions are aligned, and you can do that by by just every day kind of living this life of what you want your people to live, and nothing's worse than working for a leader who's kind of a do as I say, not as I do person. So that role, that playing that high character role for your people is really important, and you can show that in many ways. Volunteering, giving back to your community, working the same hours as your people, not going to the bar and getting drunk and getting in your car and driving after you just told them not to drink and drive over the weekend. All those small things that are really the example, the roles that we want to show to the people that are working for. But those are the 10 things that I believe make up great leaders.
Well, and I think that those are all powerful tools that yeah, are great reminders. To practice those each and every day. And you talk about inauthenticity, people that are not practicing what they preach, so to speak, to their employees or folks. And I feel personally that a lot of people can feel it. They can tell right away when somebody is inauthentic. Um, if somebody isn't basically practicing what they preach, or something's off, right? And kind of wearing a mask, so to speak. And
I've got
it's
I've got a saying, excuse my language, but I've got a
no,
saying that bullshit's transparent.
yeah,
And truthfully, although I think everybody can kind of see through that kind of that stuff, military men and women tend to see through it a lot quicker. And it is. It's funny. I was watching the news this morning. Just some of this crazy political stuff going on, and you see some of these politicians, and they stand up, and it's like the stuff coming out of their mouth. It's like, do they really believe what they're saying? Is it, and that's so dangerous. I think when you're leading arguably the nation, and people see right through it, that there is no level of sincerity there, that you're just
right.
playing these political games, and it's very, very dangerous way to lead.
Well, and I also think that when people, regardless of what they do, whether you're sales or whatever, and if you also come across needy, right? So
Yeah.
we see salespeople like feeling that they need a customer, or you need your employee for something, and you're trying to reach instead of just allowing the organic process to take effect. It's almost, and you talk about inauthenticity, like military members can smell the bullshit, if you will. The bullshit flag. I think of ref throwing the flag, and
Yeah.
it's like bullshit on the 50-yard line. But the thing is that it's true, because um, you know we want to see things authentically how they are, even the good, bad, and the ugly, right? Regardless of where it is, just tell me. That way I can base my decision on that, and I can show up accordingly,
Yeah.
and perform at that level.
Yeah, and there's a lot of ways to do it. I mean, in the big picture of things, what we're talking about is emotional intelligence, and that's
Sure.
one of the big elements of leadership that I firmly believe is missing from the military, but it's also missing from a lot of people. And a lot of people think that emotional intelligence is empathy and sympathy, but the biggest element of emotional intelligence is self awareness, and
Hmm.
that's what people are missing many times is that they don't fully understand that you know that who they are and what they are, and they're trying to be somebody else and trying to be something that they're really probably not even capable of being, and it just it's bad, and that's one of the things that I think in the one of the big mistakes the military makes, I think, is that they try to make everybody leaders. And I actually wrote a paper when I was at the Senior Enlisted Academy, and I had this idea. In the Navy, we really value the chief petty officer as a leader. Unlike a lot of services where at the sergeant level, the staff sergeant level, things start to become the senior NCO element. But in the Navy, the big transition in the enlisted ranks is at E7, and for chief petty officers. Um, and I really believe that chief petty officers are the backbone of the Navy, although it's kind of one of these sayings that just rolls off of people's tongue. But I truly believe it. I I spent 21 years in the Navy, and I've seen where on the ground where the real leadership, what fights in our Navy, and how it fights, and that's at that senior enlisted rank. But we also have some great people in the Navy at the E6 rank that are very good at their jobs, but they're not great leaders. So, as an example, a Navy ship that maybe runs on steam turbines, and the mechanics that work on those steam turbines are great mechanics, and they're quite happy every day going down into the engine room and doing their job to the best of their ability. But we punish them if they don't get promoted. Matter of fact, we kick them out of the service if they don't get promoted, and it just blows my mind because it's the technical expertise that we can never replace, and the same thing in the officers ranks. I think there's O1s through O4s. I think there's in the Navy there's great pilots in the Navy that can fly airplanes and do things that nobody else can do, but the last thing they should ever be done is be put in charge of a squadron or a command or other people. But in the Navy, if they don't get promoted and they don't get these leadership ranks, then we penalize them and we kick them out. And I find it to be a little challenging, and I always think there's some way better. But I actually wrote a paper, like I said, when I was in the Senior Enlisted Academy, that we should take E6s and O3s and O4s and scale them like we do government workers, where you have like a GS 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, where they still have an opportunity to get pay raises, but they're in this position where they're just doing their jobs very, very well. And I just, when I think of it, it drives me crazy when I see some E6 who was the best mechanic on the ship get kicked out of the Navy because he couldn't make E7. And the truth was he had no desire to make E7, but the Navy was his life, and he was the one who kept the ship running. And we just crapped on him and threw him out of the Navy. So
Well,
I don't know. It's one of the things, one of my
right.
pet peeves when it
Well, it's
comes
kind of
to.
interesting the dynamic shift of, and of course this is well before my time, but back, you think back to the World War II era, when there was a lot of, even in the 60s, right? And so when a lot of um, like a technical, now I don't know about the Navy obviously, but the Army, there was a lot of what they call E4, or well, when they call it specialists in
Right.
the Army back, that actually had a meaning. They were a specialist in the field, like a machine gunner, or they were a specialist in machine guns. And so they had the niche to kind of grow in, and they had different ratings, within that. And so it's interesting that you bring that dynamic up, because I think that kind of equates down though too, Ken, to the civilian application. Are we, if somebody is you talk about somebody that's a hell of a mechanic, but they get kicked out because they can't make E6 or E7, whatever. Does that make him a bad individual or a bad employee? No. That would be somebody you want to keep around, but maybe in the, working just on the engines or in charge of. I think we can all, I remember going back to a platoon sergeant I had many years ago, and I was a young corporal at the time, and he said, McMurray, everybody called me Mac in the military, and he goes, Mac, he goes, and of course, I was learning, I guess, my leadership style, so I was kind of a hard-headed little runt at the time, and he goes, and we were talking about transferring a soldier, is what it was, and I was very against it. And one of the things he goes, Mac, he goes, never pass up an opportunity to let somebody else go do bigger and better things for somebody else, because it doesn't mean that that individual is a bad person. They could be the next superstar for the next organization or whatever. So, talking about that, just because, it's not a fit, what somebody else has envisioned, it doesn't mean that they aren't a superstar in their own right, right? Like the mover and shaker of the engine room or whatever it is, right?
Sure. Yeah, no, it's there's a place on this earth for everybody, and not everybody's going to be a leader, and I think once we accept that, it makes for much better organizations.
Right, right. Yeah, I kind of, those words kind of take me back to also very wise words that was told to me by a lieutenant colonel one time and battalion commander, and he also told me, he goes, Mac, he goes, this is really easy as battalion commander. I don't need to be the smartest guy in the room. I just need to know enough to surround myself with the smartest guys and lady and women, of course. But and he said, then I can base my decisions based on there. So, everybody has, you hit the nail on the head where you said everybody has a place to play, in a sense, in this place on Earth. So, Ken, before we close today, where can they check out your books, organizations, all that great stuff? Where can they find that?
Yeah. So our Boulder Crest can be found simply at Boulder Crest, BOULDER Crest.org, and Struggle Well, Transformed by Trauma, all found on our website, which is strugglewell.com. And yeah, that's it. And through both of those websites, you can get hold of me directly. I'm wide open on Facebook and LinkedIn and Twitter.
Is that the same on social media platforms as well? Struggle Well?
Struggle Well and Boulder Crest. Yeah, I think it's Boulder Crest Foundation on Facebook. Some the handles are all a little bit different,
Sure.
but for the most part. But
Well,
if you search those two terms, you'll find it.
well, beautiful. My guest today, Ken Falke. Ken, thanks so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to connect with us today. And again, thank you for your service, and thank you what you continue to do. It's you're changing lives out there. So keep up the great work, and it's great connecting with you.
Thanks, Mac. Have a good day and Happy New Year.
Yep, same to you.